Every cell in our body needs oxygen. Without it, we would die within minutes. Every cell in our body must also rid itself of carbon dioxide. As we breathe or respire, we obtain oxygen by inhaling. When we exhale, we release carbon dioxide. Like other bodily functions, such as heartbeat and blood pressure, breathing goes on without our conscious attention, for example, when we are asleep. But we can also control our breathing if we wish, during exercise or when swimming, and of course when we talk or sing. The organs that make breathing possible form the respiratory system. The major function of the respiratory system is to supply our body tissues with oxygen and rid them of carbon dioxide. Two separate processes must work properly for respiration to be successful: ventilation and gas exchange. Ventilation is the movement of air through the nose, mouth, throat, and lungs. Gas exchange occurs in the lungs, where oxygen is transferred from the incoming breath and added to the bloodstream, and carbon dioxide is transferred from the bloodstream to the outgoing breath. Respiration also occurs at the cellular level. The oxygen delivered to our cells is used in chemical reactions within those cells to convert glucose, blood sugar, into energy, while carbon dioxide, a byproduct of this process, is excreted from our cells and removed by the bloodstream. This is called cellular respiration or metabolism. A normal adult inhales about 1/2 liter of air in one breath while at rest, approximately 20% of which is oxygen. This is repeated roughly 20,000 times a day, 700 million times over an average lifetime. Virtually all of our body's blood travels through the lungs every minute. The respiratory system consists of the upper respiratory tract, the lower respiratory tract, and the lungs. The upper respiratory tract consists primarily of the nose, pharynx, and larynx. The lower respiratory tract includes the trachea and bronchi, which pass into the lungs. When we inhale, air typically enters through the nostrils in our nose into the nasal passages. Lining the nasal passageways, mucus and microscopic hair-like membranes called cilia trap and remove dust and germs from the air as it flows through. The cilia can sweep mucus and dust at a speed of about 2 centimeters per minute, like a slow escalator, towards the pharynx until eventually it can be swallowed or coughed out of the body. Damp mucus is also a good humidifier, adding moisture to the incoming air if it is too dry. 3 flat, spongy plates of bone, called nasal conchae or turbinates, protrude into the nasal passages. Blood flowing through the membranes on these plates causes them to act like radiators, warming the air as it flows by. Air moves from the nasal cavities through the pharynx or throat. Lined with muscle and mucous membranes, the pharynx is like a hallway for both the respiratory and digestive tract, since both air and food must pass through this organ before reaching the appropriate openings at its base. The pharynx also plays a role in speech. It changes shape in order to produce vowel sounds. Food passes from the pharynx into the esophagus, while air passes into the larynx, which is also called the voice box. The structure, called the epiglottis, acts to block food from moving into the airway during the process of swallowing. The larynx is composed of cartilage and muscle. The thyroid cartilage, which forms our Adam's apple, is located in the larynx. Two thin muscular strips coated in mucus called vocal cords stretch across the larynx and vibrate as air passes over them, producing sounds. Muscles in the larynx manipulate the vocal cords. For example, loudness depends on the force of the vibration. Pitch depends on the frequency of the vibrations. Children and women usually possess shorter vocal cords than men, which is why their voices tend to be higher pitched. The trachea, or windpipe, connects the upper respiratory system to the lower respiratory system. Roughly 1.5 centimeters in diameter and 10 centimeters long, the trachea is a membranous tube reinforced by tough, C-shaped cartilage hoops, which provide structural support. It is lined with mucus and cilia, which trap inhaled dust and debris, propelling these particles upwards towards the pharynx, where they can be expelled by coughing. Anything that obstructs or blocks the trachea can prevent breathing and cause death. That is why the Heimlich maneuver, a procedure to expel food or a foreign object from this blocked airway, was developed. The left and right primary bronchi branch off from the trachea and conduct air into the left and right lung. The bronchi continue to branch off into smaller and smaller passageways, distributing air throughout the lungs. Bronchitis is an inflammation of the bronchi, resulting from a cold or infection. Asthma can cause bronchoconstriction, resulting in partial or even complete closure of the bronchi. The lungs extend from the base of the neck to the diaphragm and fit inside the thoracic cavity. The right lung consists of 3 lobes, the left lung of 2. The space in between the lungs is called the mediastinum and contains the heart and blood vessels. The thoracic cage, also called the rib cage, is made up of bone and cartilage. It protects the lungs and aids in their expansion and contraction during respiration. Each lung is enclosed by a double-layer membrane called the pleura. The inner layer is connected to the lung itself. The outer layer is connected to the chest wall, forming a sac called the pleural cavity. When we inhale, the lungs expand and fill the pleural cavity, which contains lubricating fluid. An inflammation of the pleural membrane, called pleurisy, can be caused by pneumonia and lead to respiratory failure. The bronchi extend into the lungs, branching off all the way down to microscopic-sized respiratory bronchioles, and terminating in structures called alveoli. Alveoli are microscopic air sacs that look like clusters of grapes. Pulmonary capillaries surround each alveolus, and it is here that gas exchange actually occurs. Through diffusion, carbon dioxide molecules are transferred from blood cells to alveoli, and oxygen molecules are transferred from alveoli to blood cells. We breathe out the carbon dioxide when we exhale, and our bloodstream delivers the all-important oxygen to every cell in our body. A blood cell spends only about 1/3 of a second passing by an alveolus, but in that brief time it picks up hundreds of millions of molecules of oxygen. Then it flows away into larger and larger blood vessels to be delivered to the heart, from where it is pumped around the body carrying its oxygen. An average adult possesses between 300 and 700 million alveoli. If you flatten them all out, they would equal an area of about 80 square meters, the floor size of a 3-car garage. And all of this space is used for gas exchange. Breathing is accomplished with the aid of muscle contractions and air pressure. In a resting state, the air pressure inside the lungs, called intrapulmonic pressure, approximates outside or atmospheric air pressure, while air pressure inside the pleural cavity, called intrapleural pressure, is slightly less. A barometer measures air pressure, and we will use a barometer to illustrate what happens as we breathe. During inspiration, that is, when we inhale, muscles attached to the chest wall, called intercostal muscles, and a wall of muscle that separates the thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity, called the diaphragm, contract. This contraction enlarges the thoracic cavity, and as it expands, the pleural cavity also expands. As the pleural cavity expands, the intrapleural pressure drops, and the lungs consequently expand to fill the empty space. As the lungs expand, their pressure also drops. And this drop in intrapulmonary pressure draws in outside air until the atmospheric and intrapulmonic pressures are again equal. Expiration, or exhaling, is normally passive. As the diaphragm and intercostal muscles relax, the thoracic cavity contracts, and the intrapleural and intrapulmonary pressures rise above atmospheric pressure, forcing air out of the lungs. An average individual who is not running or doing heavy physical work processes about 12,000 liters of air per day through their lungs. This is enough air to fill a large living room, and approximately 600 liters of oxygen are extracted from this amount of air and transported by the circulatory system to our body's cells. In quiet breathing, the diaphragm moves only about 1.5 centimeters and expels only about half a liter of air with each expiration, leaving 2.5 liters in the lungs. But during vigorous exercise, our muscles need extra oxygen to process more fuel, and we can inhale and exhale as much as 4 liters of air per breath. Involuntary respiration is controlled by the respiratory center located in a part of the brain called the brainstem. Although many different factors contribute in regulating respiration, including physical activity and emotions such as fear and anxiety, the respiratory center is primarily influenced by carbon dioxide levels in the arterial blood. As carbon dioxide levels increase, the brain prompts the diaphragm and intercostal muscles to contract, which, as we have seen, initiates inspiration. Carbon dioxide buildup in the bloodstream is the single most important stimulus to breathe. To illustrate this, hold your breath for 10 or 15 seconds. The urge to resume breathing becomes more and more acute as the seconds tick off. This is a direct result of carbon dioxide levels rising in our bloodstream, and our brain's increasingly urgent reaction to this condition is to prompt us more and more insistently to breathe out. And so it goes. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out. On and on, day and night, asleep or awake, year after year. Now, I'm going to take a breather.